by a road in Salt Lake City. Her sign says she's stranded, in need of help, trying to get home. When drivers stop, she tells them,
I'm from Seattle. I came down here to live with my boyfriend, and he ended up kicking me out a week before Christmas.
And you got nothing then?
No, just my backpack.
She tells this reporter from KUTV she's 1,000 miles from home.
It's hard to eat. It's hard to have a place to stay.
But then the cameraman quietly followed her and found she actually lives just 2 blocks away in this house. In the morning, she'd go shopping with a nice coat and purse, and then in the afternoon, she changed clothes and walked 2 blocks to the highway off ramp and took out her son.
So you mean to tell me you don't think that she should have a place to stay after supposedly being able to live in a place that was specifically... I mean, she got a lot of money from panhandling, and you think what she's supposed to do with that? Spend a whole bunch of money on cocaine, crack, and heroin, and whatever other drug out there? Is that what she's supposed to do? Or isn't she supposed to pay for a place to stay? Isn't she supposed to pay for like a room or whatever? So it's not really a shock that she's in a house. Now, I think you guys are so stupid that you think that, oh, she lives in a house. That means she owns the whole damn house. That young girl owns a whole fucking house. Like, what kind of dumb fuck are you? Like, do you know how broke people work? Okay, they're broke people in houses, one. They own the house. They rent the house. Many rent the house. Don't even own the house, but they can't afford the rent on the house, so they rent out the rooms in the house. So the person renting the house is not even able to pay for the house itself, so they rent out the rooms in the house so then they can keep the house. And then that's how she comes into play, where she rents the rooms to the rented house. So then nobody even freaking owns the house. Now there's some broke motherfuckers who actually do own homes. Usually shanties with mice all running through them. But even if it's not the case, a lot of broke people will rent out their homes for utility purposes, for property tax purposes. So many different reasons. There's a lot of broke people who rent out rooms. So saying that someone lives in a house is really weird, because it's like, well, where else do you want them to fucking live? If you already understood that this person was panhandling, you understood that they were getting money, you only followed her 2 days, so you do not know how long she's been panhandling. She could have just woken up that morning, been kicked out, been homeless, and then started begging. If she begged and she got a good amount of money, if somebody makes like $300 in that day, or $200 even, people who are not on crack, not on drugs, will find a place to stay. Now, there are different things. There are different agreements. There are people who will allow you to do a weekly rate of just like paying like $150, $125 a week to live in the room, basically. There are temporary situations. There are so many different things. And we have the internet nowadays, so we can connect with the people who are renting their homes temporarily, people who are renting their homes weekly, couple days, some people doing it monthly. You can figure out who's who, and usually the people who are doing the temporary stuff are just saying, come here, give me $100. I've seen some people even say $70. That was so low, I don't know how that worked out, but there are so many different types of people. Some people ask for 100, some people ask for 150, and so forth. And you just give them that, they'll let you stay there for a week. Some people are renting out their couches. You don't know where she lives in the house. She could be literally living on the couch. So, I find it very weird that you just assumed, oh, she lives in a house. Okay, so you really thought that somebody was going to give her 100, 200 for panhandling on the low end of things, especially since she's a white girl. That she would be given 150 or so, and she was not going to have a place to stay at the end of that night. That would mean she got high. Okay, if she gets anything 100 or more in the day, and she doesn't have a place to stay the next day, that's because she's a drug addict who spent her 100, spent her 150, spent her 200 on drugs, and she didn't spend that 150 or 200 on temporary housing so then she can have a place to sleep. She likes to sleep outside. Clearly, she likes to sleep outside. That's not a shock. There are plenty of crackheads that love to sleep outside. To me, they are not homeless. They are people who choose to sleep outside. There's a difference. You can choose to sleep outside, and you can be homeless, as in you cannot pay for rent, you are broke, you don't have money, and you need funds. That is a different thing than actually having the funds and spending it on something else. Crackheads have the funds to pay for rent. They choose not to, and they choose to instead sleep outside because that's their preference. Some people prefer to sleep outside. Some people prefer to sleep inside. It's all about your personal preferences at that point. Continue.
People gave her money. About $3, $5. Doing the math shows she made more than $50 an hour. I just felt sorry for her. A girl out there like that.
I gave her a couple dollars.
She lives in a house. What do you think about that?
That is crazy. I live in a trailer. Dude, people pull over. I don't say anything to anybody. I hold this sign. I don't make anybody give me money.
It is true that she doesn't make anyone give her money, but lots of people want to help those who seem to be in need.
I got it.
But lots of America's beggars are not needy. They're just freeloaders who've found a good racket.
How do you know that she's not in need, though? Her sign specifically said that she was stranded and was far from home. She could still be stranded and far from home. She could be renting a room because she got money from her panhandling, and now she may not have an ID, she may not have any way of getting back home, and she may be basically trying to maybe start anew where she is and actually try and, you know, get her identification and things of that nature. You can't get a job if you don't have identification. So she would be left to basically panhandle, which would honestly to me be productive in the sense that if you don't have a job and you don't have any way of making money, well, the next thing to do would be to be panhandling. If your only way of making rent is to panhandle and otherwise you will be homeless, then I guess that would be your only option, especially in a city that is very urban, you know. So, to me, I don't hold anything against what she's doing as far as that. It seems like maybe that's her mode of survival. You know, you don't know how long she's been doing it. She could be doing it just then, but she could be still like in the process of waiting for her identification, waiting to be able to apply for jobs and so forth. You know, you can't apply for jobs without identification. So if she doesn't have identification, she needs to actually get identification. And then after she gets identification, then she can apply for jobs and get a paycheck, which takes usually 2 weeks. So this is a process, you know. During that time, panhandling seems like a good idea, honestly, for her to be able to continuously be able to provide for herself a place to stay. Now, saying that panhandlers are just freeloaders, that's not really true, I don't think, for all of them. I think that some of them are, some of them aren't. Like, there are some people who lose their jobs, okay? There are some people who end up stranded like her. You know, there are some people who end up in all these different situations, you know, and they do not have access to a job that can make them money and make them able to get a place within 2 or 3 days. They don't have that option. So they are left with asking people for donations basically at this point because they don't have any other way of keeping a roof over their head. You know, I don't understand why you have to make the assumption that all panhandlers are homeless. That's a weird assumption. Like, I've worked and lived with people who specifically were panhandlers. And not because they weren't in need, because they were in need at the time. Like, There are some people who, they don't have their identification, and the only way to pay for their $550 hole in the wall rent was to go out on the side of the road and beg on the strip for money. Which, that's their choice. That's what they had to do. They had to do what they had to do. They had to pay their rent. How else were they going to do it? So they had to, beg on the streets. If they don't have a job, they still need money, to pay for rent. I don't understand why you don't realize that. And then there are other people who may not be unemployed. Because, some people are out of a job. You've never been out of a job and out of money, but still have housing and are still trying to continue having housing without having any funds coming in. Plenty of people are in that situation where they don't want to be homeless. So they're trying to find other ways to make money. And if that's begging people on the street, well, then so be it. I would, if I had the choice and I had to be in that situation, I would rather be not homeless on the street. I would rather be not homeless on the streets and begging for money than being homeless on the street and not begging for money. You know what I mean? Like, of course, if you are someone with a place to stay, why wouldn't you try to continue that by asking for funds from people on the street? You should. That's what you should be doing. That's obvious. So that's my perspective on that. Now, you can basically continue, I guess, but yeah, to me, I just think you guys don't really think of it realistically about poor people. But continue.
When I first reported on freeloading, I wondered, would these people holding "will work for food" signs really work for food?
I just can't work for anybody.
Would he flip burgers at Burger King?
I wouldn't do it. It's a monotonous job.
Maybe construction.
I can't do it. My back.
He says he would do janitorial work.
That I would do.
But will he do it 5 days a week?
That I can't do.
Why not?
Well, why should I? Why does a human have to work every day if he don't want to?
I have lawn work. Do you? You have
Why is it an assumption that people don't work that are panhandling? Plenty of people I work with panhandled, okay? Especially in the call centers, okay? You don't realize what it's like to live off minimum wage when the hours are being cut, okay? Minimum wage, especially since this is 6 years ago, this is specifically the time period I'm actually talking about. Back in that day, we specifically would make $8.25 an hour, and many of the time we would only we'd be being paid like 4 hours a day, maybe. We would be getting cut all the time. And at the old place right before that place, well, let's see. Oh, yeah, actually, this was actually during the time of the previous job, yeah, that I was at. And I was specifically working at the job where we got cut 2 hours, okay? We got paid a little bit more. We got paid $9 an hour. Yeah, so many of the time we worked making $18 a day, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 days a week. Some weeks there was only like 2 days you could actually even schedule your work in. So when you are being cut down to such low hours, and it's not election season yet, because before, like the year, like every winter, it was always like that, where after about the 18th of December, there was no work at all. On wages where you're only making like $300 a month in the first place. Maybe you could say you might make like $500 on the other months because the median is $300 basically a month at this type of job that I worked basically. So, you mean to tell me that someone who is averaging out $300 a month. And for the people who would sometimes go to like Novum and stuff, sometimes as supplement money, supplement their rent, maybe get $400 a month. Some people, they had really good veins. They would go to these crazy studies that would do really weird medical stuff to them. That's a different story. I don't know how much they were making. Maybe they made more money. Maybe they made like 600 extra. Maybe they were making at the most like 800-900 and trying to do those fast blood studies. Those blood studies would be like you'd be getting your blood drawn every 5 minutes. And then some of these people would literally still try to go to the blood bank just so then they could make some more money, which was dangerous because you're not supposed to do Novum and blood studies at the same time. You're not supposed to get blood at the same time because it can really mess with things if you're getting blood taken from those blood banks and you're doing studies where they take a lot of blood from you every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes. It's really a strain on your body. But, if you were doing all of that, you still probably, like, even if you were to do all of that and you made like maybe 1,000 a month, some people could make that work. But if you had kids, you probably still could not make that work because you still have to provide for your kids in so many other ways, for clothing and transportation and just a lot of other extra expenses that children cost, that you're still going to have to be in a situation where you're asking somebody for money. And, some people ask their family for money. Other people, they didn't have family to ask. So their next thing would be strangers, basically. And then, of course, there's sometimes that you could also do the thing where, like, some people would do, like, if you're running low on rent, you can also do the $400 for the year because you can get welfare money, basically $400 for rent. And that doesn't cover rent, but if you are a working person who makes like $300, it should cover it for that month. So even if you were behind in rent or you didn't have enough, you could use the $400. Now the thing is, like, what I'm saying is that some people would supplement, like I said, with Novum and stuff like that. Say you make like $400 or $500 a month, you're still going to need stuff because even if your rent is $550 and you make about like $500, $400, you might need a bag. That's just what it is. Like, at one point in my life, I was making basically off of everything. I was making like $400 a month, and I have very, very low rent because I was having a weekly. But outside of that, it was just basically really, really like, in many cases, some people would have like $500 or $600 home apartments, not homes, but apartments, that they're renting out, like rooms or whatever, out of different people's apartments or homes or whatever. And if you're only getting $400 a month, you may need to beg people on the regular for money. Now, you might not need to beg them for like $500 a day, but you're still going to need a beg, right? You're still going to be $200 down in rent every month. And then you're still going to need other expenses. So saying that, oh, you're not working. No, you could be working. You could be being cut. Your hours could be being cut. You could have where you're only getting minimum wage. Both jobs that I was at during around this time period, so the first job and then the second job right after it, there were different periods in time where it would be like $400 I made in a month, and I'm just saying, somebody who's making who needs to pay like $600 a month in their rent or $500 a month in their rent for just a cheap room would probably have to beg for the rest of their rent, And I honestly would see people begging for the rest of their rent plenty of times. When I lived at the weeklies, you would see people begging for the rest of their rent. And things of that nature. So, it's saying that people are just freeloaders or they don't want to work. That's not true. It's just not. You're just not thinking of realistic wages. You're thinking of stossel wages, okay? You're thinking of your rich lifestyle, but you're not actually thinking of actual poor people who actually do not make that much money, on an hourly basis. So, yeah.
I offered jobs to a dozen people who said they'd work for food. All 12 said they'd come, but only this man did. He did the work and we paid him $20, but he might have made more money begging.
There have been estimates that earning $100 a day panhandling is easy.
Steve Malanga and Heather McDonald write for City Journal, a magazine about urban policy. They say beggars today are hustlers.
But there must be a lot of them who are genuinely homeless or mentally ill, desperate people.
Well, every big city has food kitchens galore. The reason that people are on these.
So it's because you have food kitchens. That means we should be able to pay our rent on very, very low wages when our hours are being cut. That doesn't make any sense, sweetie pie. Like I said, I've had people I've worked with one lady who specifically had a situation where, of course, because we're getting cut, our hours were getting cut, some people would try to put their production up higher than everybody else's by falsifying surveys, right? So once you get caught, some people got fired, some people got suspended. Well, this lady, she got suspended, went to the side of the road for the week because she wasn't able to work for the week. If you live in a weekly that you have to pay $225 a week for every week, and your job just told you for the week you're not working, and you won't be able to pay for that weekly. So that means with weeklies, it's different. It's different than monthly rent, because monthly rent gives you a little time, right? Now, weeklies, when you have a situation where it's gone, your job's gone, or your job's missing in action for a week, you have to make something work, right? So when she went to the side of the road begging for money and whatever, and had a sign or whatever, to me, I didn't see her as a freeloader. I didn't see her as a bad person. I just was shocked that she did it so quickly. And I was shocked that she made more than we did inside the buildings. She did. But basically, to me, it was just like, people who do that, that's not really saying that they're like a freeloader or anything. It's not saying that they, are trying to spend it on anything wrong or anything. And food pantries and giving food to people isn't going to pay for their monthly rent, their weekly rent. It's not going to pay for anything, So, you're assuming that just because someone has a job, that they're actually going to be able to pay for their full rent, which just isn't true, Honestly, there's plenty of places that say, like, oh, we have affordable housing and stuff, and there's a main reason why they don't let, like, people who make, like, 1,000, 600, 800, 500 for a month. They don't try to have those people get into affordable housing programs and so forth, because they make too little to actually think that they can actually afford to basically keep up with the monthly rent. Basically, that's what the whole thing is with these type situations. They always say the minimum was like, long ago it was like $1,300. Now it's probably higher. But the point is that people who make very low wages and make like 10,000 or less a year, many of those people work, obviously. You think that somebody makes less than 10,000 a year without working? How the fuck does that happen? Nobody does that except people who get checks from Social Security. But then again, that's the government's fault. That's not our fault. But the point is that, plenty of people work making that amount of money. So then it's just like, how are you basically trying to act like, oh, they should be able to pay for their rent, so they shouldn't be able to, they shouldn't be panhandling? Like, the government doesn't have any ways to help people to pay for their rent, pay for their transportation, pay for, like, free bus fare to get to work and to come back from work. I mean, like, these are essential things, For me personally, working and making only $300 a month and having, like, maybe supplemental stuff from other places I did, basically, I'm not saying from the government, like focus groups and stuff like that, making like $400 a month basically in total. A major way I made, like, miscellaneous work was just using swag bucks, which made me able to go to the Walmart, which was able to make me able to basically pay for, like, clothing, like other things, like essential things. But, like, bus fare was a big problem because I didn't have any way to pay for bus fare. There was, like, no way to pay for bus fare. Really, seriously, there's nothing that would help me to be able to get to work and come back. You can bike your way there, you can walk there, so forth, and things of that nature when you have an able body. But older people don't even have that ability to do that because they don't have the wherewithal to do that. So, I mean, like, you saying that, like I said, poor people are going to be self-sufficient. Many poor people do need extra cash here and there, and some will be desperate enough to get on a corner and beg for it, especially if something happens to their job. Something happens to your job, you're pretty much desperate enough to do pretty much anything for that money because you know that you have no money coming in and you have no savings. So your next option is homelessness, eviction, then homelessness. People like to avoid evictions and homelessness, so that's why they will do pretty much a lot of things to avoid it, and that is including panhandling, which shouldn't be shamed like you guys are trying to act like it should be.
Streets asking for change is overwhelmingly drugs and alcohol.
I wasn't homeless, you know.
It's weird to me when you guys try and say that it's drugs and alcohol and blaming poor people because there's lots of drug addicts in the area who are begging for money and things of that nature. When it's like, well, that's law enforcement's fault for not arresting the drug addicts who are specifically criminalizing the streets. They literally are committing crimes by having illegal substances in their systems, yet you're blaming the poor for the fact that drug addicts are running the street, of which law enforcement was supposed to remove. Like, how does that happen? How does that have to do with poor people? The only thing it has to do with is the fact that you can't help poor people because you don't even recognize we exist because you're too busy focused on crackheads who make the wrong choices in their lives, and now all they do is spend all their money on drugs and choose not to, basically, they choose not to live in a situation where they specifically are able to pay for the rent, So that's what you're obsessed with. But that doesn't have to do with poor people who make low wages, who get cut at their job, cut hours, and so forth at crappy jobs. You're not addressing the people who are actually making very low wages. You're acting like we don't even exist because you're a rich person who doesn't realize that people are very poor and honestly and truly poor, not people who just spent their money on drugs all day.
It's just an easy way to get money.
John Buster used to make a living panhandling.
And the best day, maybe about $150.
I don't think, and also, like I said, I don't think poor people panhandling is a wrong thing. I mean, like I said, if you're in a desperate situation, you don't necessarily need to be homeless to panhandle.
Did he have trouble finding a job?
I didn't look for no job. You know what I'm saying? That was my job.
Panhandling as a job is common in some places. Here in San Francisco, packs of young, healthy kids beg for spare change. Spanging, they call it.
Gotta survive, Gotta eat, gotta drink.
An art student from Stanford interviewed some of the kids.
Wake up in the morning, you start drinking, go to bed, do it again. That's pretty much it.
They have the most deep-seated sense of entitlement that I've ever come across.
Want to be able to sit where we want to.
It's our home, man. Nobody's gonna make us leave.
Punishing homeless people for being homeless when insufficient shelter space is unavailable.
America's so-called homeless advocates often say government should solve this problem by spending more on social services, shelters, subsidies for affordable housing, jobs programs.
This is a solution that is utterly irrelevant to these kids because they're not planning on settling down. They don't want housing.
Really rely on the generosity.
For drug addicts, they have housing. You guys are not addressing where they should be. I get tired of this. Drug addicts have a house. Their home is prison. Their home is jail. That's where they belong. Because people who commit crime and break the law belong in prison. It's kind of obvious, okay? Poor people aren't specifically people who broke the law, but drug addiction and doing drugs is illegal. It is breaking the law. So the thing is, to me, is that all in all, is that you guys trying to say that, oh, these people don't want to live in homes. That doesn't matter where they want to fucking live. Okay, you can ask a serial killer, do you want to live in prison? It doesn't matter if he fucking wants to live in prison, if he wants to live on the streets, or if he wants to live on Mars. Where he needs to be is in prison or under the ground, where he is put to sleep. Okay, those are the only two options for people who are committing a crime, in my opinion. So, I mean, like, you constantly talking about people who do drugs, who break the law, and have no business being on the street. That's got nothing to do with poor people. It's got to do with law enforcement and law officials, lawmakers not actually reinforcing the laws that are already on the books. So, yeah, you can't blame poor people for poor choices of lawmakers.
Of others, and there's some very generous people.
There sure are.
Thank you so much, sir.
This beggar
thank
collected $8 in less than an hour.
Past minimum wage.
I honestly think that with social services in itself, like, some people have some ideas that they would rather have, like, a situation where they make people have subsidized housing and things of that nature. I believe that they should be able to be allowed to have subsidized housing. I do. I think people should be allowed to have subsidized housing and things of that nature, but not specifically just willy-nilly. I think it should be specific to testing if people are, doing drugs or alcohol, for that matter. Alcohol, because if you're spending money on your alcoholic habit, I just think you need to maybe go to rehab or whatever. There are people who have been rehabilitated for drinking. I do not think that the government should put money into rehabilitation because there is a recidivism rate even for alcohol. So to me, I think they need to get that figured out on their own. And if they don't, just let them drown away on the streets. I don't really care. Because to me, I mean, like, that's just your personal choice. And, it is legal to drink. So it is what it is. But there's not many people who are specifically just addicted to alcohol on the streets. It's mainly drug addicts, you know. So, I mean, it's not the biggest issue. But yeah, I do think it should be strategic to specific type of people who are not wasting away their money, and also trying to help those people into getting better jobs. I don't think it should be a consistent thing where you have subsidized housing forever. I think it should be just for a short-term basis, until people are sufficient. But people don't seem to care because they just assume everybody is a drug addicted homeless person instead of an underpaid, underworked, because you're being cut at your job and you're not the one saying, I'm going home. They're sending you fucking home. And you're left with very low wages, low paychecks that aren't going to cover your whole rent. They're not going to cover the basics. They can't even cover the whole freaking basic rent, let alone other expenses. I mean, you guys act like, oh, we shouldn't have any subsidies. Okay, just let people be homeless who have no connection to drugs, no connection to any bad habit, just a connection to minimum wage and, no, not many hours, you know. So to me, I just get tired of that. Like, I mean, like, I do think poor people do need to be helped, and there are a lot of people who make very low wages, and that doesn't mean that, they should just be forced to just struggle on like that. I think that, like, people should have some kind of way to help people, not hinder them, not put them in a program that specifically is made for them to just get crumbs, but actually to achieve something, basically. But I really feel this is more for families than anything, especially people with lots of children, than anything. But yeah, that's my perspective on that. Continue, though.
You help me, ma'am?
That's me with a beard.
It looks just like him.
Since people wouldn't give John Stossel money, I hired this makeup artist to transform me into a beggar. She glued a beard to my face. Then I put on some old clothing.
You ready to freeload? It's the new John Stossel.
I hit the streets and started begging. I didn't want to get in anyone's face, so I didn't beg aggressively. Most of the time, I just sat on the sidewalk. At first, I tried the basic homeless and cold, anything will help sign.
Little help?
It worked.
A little bit?
This woman gave me food.
Oh, thank you very much. A little food.
I even got offered a cigarette.
No, thank you.
This man gave me some change and a job offer.
Listen, if you're looking for a little work, I need somebody to hand out flyers. If you're around, I'll see you tomorrow. And
Here? Thank you.
After half an hour, I switched to this sign.
I get a beer?
I'd seen beggars trying this more honest, or you might say funny approach. I didn't think anyone would give this guy money, but I was wrong.
Thank you.
I'm a beer drinker myself.
Yeah, thank you.
I made just...
Yeah, there's certain people who are addicted, who are drug addicts or alcoholics, who specifically are, they're addicted anyway, but they live in homes, they have money and so forth, so they sympathize, basically. So you see that plenty of times. You see a lot of people who will say that they're looking for money for weed, marijuana, or whatever the hell. And people love those signs. Like, tons of cracked out drug addicts with some money in their pockets will just give them stuff because they will sympathize with how, they want so badly to get high, or how they, yearn for that kind of, I guess, feeling or something. So they sympathize with people who aren't able to get high. So yeah. It's interesting how that works. But yeah, I've seen plenty of people give money to those type of people. I just always thought, why can't, like, the police just arrest people like that? But anyway.
Just as much money with my beer sign as I did with my cold and homeless sign. Some people wanted to take my picture.
That's funny as hell. Can I have a picture with you?
Sure.
My girlfriends will think that's too cute. I'll buy you a beer.
There you go.
Get in. Jenny gonna crack up.
We caught up with the people who gave me money, gave them their money back, and asked them, why did you give?
It's kind of cold outside. I'm pretty cold myself, so I'm thinking about his situation.
I don't know, that guy looked pretty needy, I suppose.
I just begged for an hour, but I did well. If I did this for an 8-hour day, I would have made $90, $23,000 for a year, tax-free.
That easy money is why cities are filled with panhandlers.
Individuals respond to incentives. If that incentive includes giving them money for no work, there'll be more of them doing that.
And the people who give,
They're doing a very bad thing. They are merely perpetuating somebody's misery. As long as they can stay on the streets getting money for drugs and alcohol, they're going to.
I don't understand how people lack the accountability. You literally are saying, as long as they can continue to stay on the street and commit crime, they're going to. Criminals always do that, sweetie. If you let a criminal stay on the street and commit crime, they will commit it until they drop fucking dead. The whole point of crime is that police and law enforcement are supposed to remove the criminals from the fucking streets. So you are looking at the criminal saying, criminal, you're supposed to stop committing the crime. Stop getting high. Stop doing drugs. That's illegal. That's illegal. It's a crime. That's what you're basically asking. You're saying criminals should stop committing crime, even though we're just letting them on the street. We're not trying to apprehend them. We're not trying to remove them from the street. Nope. We're just expecting criminals to just get bored one day and stop committing crime. Do you see how you lack accountability here? The accountability belongs with the law enforcement that is not addressing and is not arresting the drug addicts who are committing the crime by getting high every day and, finding money to basically get high. That is whose fault it is. It's law enforcement for not arresting these people and putting them in prison. You should have put these people in prison. Instead, you're complaining that the criminal is committing crime. Criminals commit crime. That's the whole point of being a criminal. They're supposed to commit crime. Police officers are supposed to arrest criminals, and law enforcement and lawmakers are supposed to keep criminals in prison so then criminals do not commit crime. So, you can't blame poor people. Poor people are not lawmakers. Poor people are not law enforcers. We're not police officers. We got nothing to do with this shit. The only thing is we fall victim to these people the most. We get victimized by these people. They become very competitive with our jobs. They mess up our jobs. They make it where, like they flood the social services. They just ruin every fucking thing. They ruin everything. And then you want to say, oh, they're all like poor people. Because you don't want to address poverty. You want to just make it a smokescreen and talk about criminalized drug addicts and drug dealers and all those types of people, for that matter, that you don't take off the street. And you don't apprehend like you should. So stop blaming poor people and put the blame where it belongs. You're not addressing the crime that's being committed by drug addicts. And you're not putting them in jail like they need to be. Instead, you're just letting them run loose and then surprised why they're not sobering up and basically stop committing crime. That's not what a criminal does. And when it comes to drugs, The recidivism rate is very high. Most of them will never stop doing drugs. They will always be addicted to drugs. So you need to act appropriately and act accordingly and basically keep them locked up for life, you know? So that's got nothing to do with poor people. Minimum wage has to do with poor people. Shorter hours at work have to do with poor people. Smaller paychecks have to do with poor people, and you don't want to address any of that. You just want to talk about the fact that, law enforcement isn't addressing the drug dealers or the drug addicts that are running the streets, and you want to just talk about those people, but you don't want to talk about poor people who are actually living paycheck to paycheck because we're working people.
And they're enabling a very self-destructive lifestyle.
You're just right-wingers who are not compassionate. Some of these kids, adults, must be in need.
Some are, but the proper solution for that is not to keep enabling a lifestyle that eventually is going to lead.
Just ignore them.
Yes.
That's the.
So basically, your whole point is that you think that it's not going to help them, but you think that somehow the solution that you have in mind is going to help when it never does. It just doesn't. And the reason it doesn't help is because you don't even know what the problem is. Because you assumed what the problem was, and the problem that you're trying to address, you're not even trying to fix in the proper way. But let's continue.
City agencies give real change to the homeless. Call us. We'll send an outreach team to help.
Give to charities. Don't give to people. It doesn't get through.
A few cities, this is Athens, Georgia, try to get through to people by installing fake parking meters. They call them homeless meters.
On the parking meters, it says, don't give to the panhandler. If you feel a need for compassion, put it in here. We'll make sure it goes to people who really need the money, and the money is used in the right way.
Resources do exist to help the truly needy. Food kitchens are plentiful. One charity I like is the Dough Fund. They helped John Buster put panhandling behind him. Instead of giving handouts, they retrain people to take responsibility for their lives.
They don't.
So showing food pantries and stuff like that is weird to me because everyone knows you can get free food. Having a short paycheck that only pays you $300 or $400 a month, that pays you $600 a month, having a lifestyle like that is going to make you very short on money often. And I don't understand why people act like that is a shock. I don't understand why some people act like that's a situation that specifically would mean that you would be able to get like food from a food pantry, and somehow that's going to make you be able to pay for your bare necessities in life. I think you're thinking of drug addicts because you constantly talk about like outreach. Outreach has to do with drug addicts, and outreach doesn't help shit, okay? It doesn't even help drug addicts at the end of the day. It doesn't. The solution the lady brought up, it's just a waste of money. You guys have a waste of resources, a waste of money. You're paying people to do things as far as, rehab and rehabilitation of drug addicts. That's going down the fucking drain because the people are going to go back on drugs in a month, in a year, in 4 years, however long it takes them. But they will be back on drugs because recidivism rate for many of these drugs is up to over 90%. So if drug abuse is 90% or over 90% rate, then how do you expect these outreach programs to help anyone when 90% of drug addicts are just going to go back on drugs. This is why you guys being stupid after knowing that statistically these people will never stop doing drugs. You're still wasting money on trying to convince people to stop doing drugs when 90% are not going to stop doing drugs. You should understand that you should stop wasting your money on outreach and start investing your money on prisons, okay? To me, that's what I think. With those type of people, invest your money in prisons so then you can clear out these type of people from society. One, also, these type of people mess everything up with our jobs because when they take jobs, they, one, do not function well at the job. So they mess up production, and also they take a place for people who are poor and actually would have taken that job and actually been very good at that job, at least productive enough to actually, function at that job because they're not on drugs. They're not mentally impaired, you know. If they're mentally impaired, for example, naturally or biologically, usually there's disability programs and stuff like that, disability, social security payments that you'll get and so forth. So those people are not included in what I'm talking about. People of mental sound, mind and body and able bodies and so forth, these type of people could easily take those jobs and, do better at that job than a drug addict. A drug addict, many of the time they have poor attendance. Many of the time when they're there, they're not all the way there, okay? There's so many different levels to this, okay? Like, even if you're in a call center where the customers cannot see you, you're slurring your words, that in itself makes the company look badly, okay? So that's just what I have to say on that issue, is that, like, when you guys talk about, like, outreach and stuff, there's no way in trying to convince these people to actually be upstanding citizens. 90% are done for, okay? It's over. Stop trying to say, oh, they can be helped. They can't be helped. It's over. They're fucking dead, okay? Basically, just put them in prison, let it be. But to me, it's just like trying to act like that's poor people's fault. It's not poor people's fault that drug addicts exist. We just happen to be poor and in need. But the people who are on drugs are just drug addicts who deserve to be in prison because they are criminals who break the law. So, stop blaming poor people for drug addiction, because we got nothing to do with that. We made the right choices in our lives, so then we do not struggle with drug addiction. Honestly, I'll tell you, for me, if I ever had any kind of addiction, I would have been homeless for like 8 years or something, because I always been very poor. And for me, it's just like, if I were to do something like that, I wouldn't have had much money to, pay for rent at all. Like, I barely had enough to pay for rent much of the time. If I had any, addiction, I would not have even been with a place to stay, and I've never been homeless. So anyway, I just think, when you guys talk about this, it's just like, you don't really know how to help the situation because you don't really know the reality. You don't pay attention to what life is like living off of actual minimum wage. You guys act like it doesn't exist. What do you think? We're all surgeons or something? Like, average Joes out here are really just surgeons making $300,000 a year. Like, I don't understand why people make the assumption that everybody's rich. Not everyone in America is rich or near rich. Many of us are very, very, very extremely poor, where, like, even people who claim to be poor are, like, shocked how poor we are. That's just how it is.
Allow you to get food stamps or anything or nothing like that. That's not allowed in those. They want you to be independent.
They gave John room and board and paid him to clean streets. Now he supervises others.
You don't have to wait around for somebody to give you something. You go out there and you make your own money. You get your self-esteem back.
Because happiness comes from productive work, not freeloading.
Productive work, I don't get it. The whole assumption of this whole video It's very weird to me because it's like you guys assumed that everybody who panhandled did not work. You assumed everyone who panhandled was homeless. I don't get why you guys assumed that, but I mean, like I said, I've worked with people who were clearly working and productive and had homes who panhandled because they did not make enough money at the job. Like I knew how much I was making. I could tell most people were not making much money at that time at the job. It's different times of the year you get less work when you work in the call center, basically. And this is because with politics, basically, after the election, in the main, like the general election every 4 years, there's very little work after that election cycle. So, like December 18th or shortly before Christmas, it's basically dead until April. And then it still may be dead in April. Yeah, some years it's like that. So to me, I mean, like when you live that kind of lifestyle where, you can have a lot of work during the seasons where election season is, and at one job specifically, there was more work with health care, health insurance, and so forth in the spring, every spring. So people could get income that way. But the winter, people gotta live in the winter too. And if you don't have money in those time periods and you're not getting work because there's no work to be had, those are time periods when you may be desperate. And I didn't see anything wrong with my coworkers at either job begging for money when you're down and out. When you're down and out and you don't have any way to ask your family for money or anyone else for money, and your job isn't coming through, then what do you expect people to do? They still need to pay for their weekly rent, their monthly rent, or whatever the fuck their rent is. They don't want to be homeless. So, I mean, like, that's not really a shock. If you live paycheck to paycheck and the paycheck isn't coming, you still need to figure out how to pay for rent because rent is still coming. Rent doesn't care if your paycheck isn't coming. So, that's all I have to say in this video. It's like you guys really don't know minimum wage living. You don't know how, small wages work. Like if you only make a little amount of money every month and so forth, you don't really understand any of that. It seems like you just understand like drug addiction, where they do make a lot of money, they just spend it on the wrong things, or things of that nature. You don't really seem to know poverty. You just talk about like homeless people and food kitchens. Like that's all we pay for these days, isn't it? We just pay for food. We don't pay for rent. You don't pay for a car note. You don't pay for clothing. You don't pay for miscellaneous. You don't pay for anything else. Like people never talk about any of the other things that people pay for. Oh no, it's just food kitchens. That's all we pay for these days. Very weird. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Another tone-deaf video, but yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe, comment down below, and have a great day. Bye, guys.